Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Gross, M-I-C-H-E-L-L-E-G-R-O-S-S, and I'm the president of Communities United Against Police Brutality. And we are really excited today to be able to talk to you about our efforts to ensure justice through the DOJ investigation. And let me get some of our other speakers up here. Come on up here. Come on up. Great, come on up here. All right, buddy. So again, thank you for being here. We, like I said, we are really excited to share some interesting news about the Department of Justice investigation and our role in it, as well as to talk a little bit about some of the road bumps that we've had along the way. The first thing I'd like to talk about is just essentially what the DOJ investigation is and what we've been doing about it. You guys can gather in a little closer. See in the picture, you guys, come on. Okay. So Communities United Against Police Brutality, as soon as we heard that the Department of Justice was coming to town, they invited us to a meeting when they first got here, and we met with them. But prior to that, our organization, as well as a number of other organizations, were involved in actually writing a letter to the Department of Justice to ask them to come here and do this investigation. And in a moment, you'll hear from Jonathan, who was the chief author of that letter. But we asked them to come, and very happily, they did agree to come here. We did ask them to investigate a number of departments in the state of Minnesota. They selected to only start with an investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, but we are happy that they have done that, at least that. And we will ask them, continue to ask them to investigate in other departments. Once they came here, they explained to us that they would be looking into disparate treatment of people of color in our community. They were also going to be looking into excessive force for people, against people of color as well as protesters in our community. And then they said that they would be looking into the disparate treatment of people with disabilities, particularly mental health disabilities. We have asked them to add 2 additional categories, which they've agreed to do. One was the impact of the Minneapolis police on unsheltered homeless people, particularly people at encampments. The treatment of those folks has been egregious and outrageous, and we wanted them to include that. And then the second area that we asked them to look into is the lack of meaningful investigations into violent crimes against people of color, particularly murder. I'm working with, I would say, in the neighborhood of a dozen families whose family members were killed by street violence, but for whom there has never been a meaningful investigation by the Minneapolis Police Department. And so the DOJ did agree, in fact, to take a look at that piece as well, and they've been interviewing those families. And so these are all the areas that they were working on. As soon as we learned that the DOJ was, in fact, going to come here, we immediately got in touch with members of communities all over the country who had had similar investigations of their police departments. We asked them to tell us a little bit about their experiences, tell us a little bit about their consent decrees and what came out of those investigations, and how we could make sure that we had the very best investigation possible and the very best outcome. And universally, the answer was make sure the community is at the table. And so that's what we've been doing. We have held a series of events all over the city, about 24, in fact, where we have sat down with members of the community, told them about the investigation, asked for their opinions about if there's going to be a consent decree, what do you want to see in it? And so we've asked for that and had people tell us, and so we've been gathering essentially a list of community demands. We will be formulating these demands into a demand document so that when the time comes for a consent decree to be put together, we will make sure that those demands are part of that consent decree. So we're getting ready for that purpose. But we didn't want to stop there. We then put about 30 canvassers in the street, going door to door, knocking on people's doors, talking to people, meeting people on the sidewalks, at businesses, at any place that people congregate and go. We've been going around and collecting from these folks their experiences with the police department. We told them about the investigation, we asked their opinions about what to do, and then we collected their experiences. And what we're here to announce today is that we have collected over 1,000 experiences from the community in the last few months alone. In fact, we're up to about 1,100 as of today. And so we are extremely proud of that effort. I think it's the most data gathering that has ever happened to find out what the community actually wants and what the community has actually experienced. I think it's the most significant gathering of that information that's ever happened in this city. We talked a little earlier today with the Minnesota Department of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. We will be sharing this information with them as well as the DOJ. And in their own investigation and their efforts, they have only collected about 300 experiences. And this is over, a year-long period now. So only in a few months, we've now collected over 1,000 experiences. People are eager to talk about what has happened to them at the hands of the Minneapolis police. Roughly 35% of the experiences that we've gathered relate to lack of service. Another 30% or so relate to excessive force. And then the rest are spread across a continuum. And so these are the things that people are talking about in the city, and these are the things that the DOJ needs to hear about. Recognize that the DOJ, for the most part, most of the members of the investigatory team live in Washington, D.C. They don't live here. They don't know what's going on here. They're not aware of all the things that are happening in this community. It's our job as a community to tell them what they need to know to do a proper investigation. And it's our job to inform that investigation with the experiences of actual people who live here. And so that's been a big part of what we've been trying to do. In addition, we have an extremely large database of documents from the city, an extensive database of documents that goes back 21 years, the entire history of our organization. And so in other words, we have more documents on the city than the city has, because they have a retention schedule and they can get rid of things after 4 years, 5 years, 7 years. Our retention schedule is never throw anything away. And so consequently, we have a lot of documents that we are sharing with the DOJ and now with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights in order to inform those investigations and to give them a deeper look at how the history of our Minneapolis Police Department has projected over time. And so those are the things that we have been working on. We're going to continue to work on these areas until there is a resolution in these investigations, and until that resolution is one that will actually change policing in the city of Minneapolis. We're not doing this for a futile exercise. We're an all-volunteer group. We have no paid staff. So for us to do this kind of a job and take it on, such a large endeavor, we have to be serious about it. And we are serious about it. We expect to have an outstanding consent decree that will fundamentally change the way police operate in this city, and that's our goal. And so with that, and actually I think I'll open this box so you all can see all of these over 1,000 experience forms that we have been submitting to the DOJ. We're very pleased. Like I said, we've done an enormous amount of work, and behind me are a lot of the people who have done this work, and they've done a tremendous job. They're out every night and all weekend long talking to people, gathering their experiences, learning what people feel about the Minneapolis police, and hearing the frustrations and the desire for change. And those things are huge. I think that they would tell you that the work is very rewarding. Some of them are going to speak to you, and I don't want to speak for them, but this is, to me, in the 34 or so years I've been doing police accountability work, this is the most important work we've ever done. And I think it's very, very significant. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Jonathan Mason to speak. Oh my God. So sorry, another person I know named Jonathan. Jonathan McClellan, who is the president of Minnesota Justice Coalition. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. My apologies.
Hello, my name is Jonathan McClellan with the Minnesota Justice Coalition. We are part of a collective of organizations that work with families and community to draft and advance legislation and other policy initiatives at the Capitol in St. Paul and in Washington, D.C. Communities United Against Police Brutality has collected over 1,000 stories of pain and brutality from the community to update the Department of Justice on their investigation of the Minneapolis Police Department. This process has allowed residents from the city of Minneapolis to have their voices heard. We ask the United States Department of Justice to investigate and include these patterns of conduct from law enforcement as part of their patterns and practices investigation. We have been hearing reports concerning the harassment of canvassers. Law enforcement and the city's violence interrupters have been following around and making things difficult for canvassers. We have received reports that a Somali canvassing team was being told by operatives from Mayor Fry's campaign to take Communities United Against Police Brutality signs from windows, telling citizens not to share their stories and spreading misinformation. There was recently a report that a crime prevention specialist from the Minneapolis Police Department called for Communities United Against Police Brutality signs to be removed from the streets. These signs were next to the candidate signs. When asked for more information about what ordinance was being violated by signs, the crime prevention specialist refused to state a reason. We will be asking the Department of Justice to investigate these allegations and complaints of tampering with canvassers and the possibility of taxpayer dollars being used to fund the spread of disinformation and harassment. Let's not forget why we are here. The lack of trust in local law enforcement and city officials, along with the murders leading up to George Floyd and the ones after, and the continuing assault on our communities, primarily of color, by law enforcement, has required the Department of Justice to investigate the Minneapolis Police Department. As stated previously, it is important that a thorough and independent investigation bring to light any patterns of misconduct that still exist. This is needed to heal our community as well as find areas that need reform and ultimately obtain justice and build public trust of our institutions that are supposed to protect us, not protect and serve the institution that has created fear, mistrust, pain, and suffering, and taken life from our community. The Minnesota Justice Coalition stands with Communities United Against Police Brutality, the community, and victims. We have a message for political leaders and law enforcement community who think we are going back to the status quo. We are not going backwards, and transparency and accountability is paramount to our process. We will continue to move forward and seek justice for the victims. We are a nation of laws. Just because you are an elected official does not place you above those laws. You will be held to account for your actions or inaction. For those who wish to disrupt or interfere with the canvassers who are trying to assist with these investigations, you will be held accountable. We also asked Jacob Fry to direct his staff and the city not to interfere in the DOJ investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. Thank you.
Jaylani Hussein, the Executive Director of CARE Minnesota. The Department of Justice investigation is a welcome gesture from the federal government. But as you will hear and heard, Minneapolis is suffering from an institution, the Minneapolis Police Department, that has relied on the accomplice from political leaders and the rank and file and racist union leaders like Bob Kroll and others who have taken over reign. What we have experienced in my conversations in the events that Communities United Against Police Brutality held in Minneapolis is a sheer fear in communities and individuals who have suffered police brutality. Many who are afraid to share their story and testament, many who believe that the Department of Justice investigation, through misinformation, that this effort will completely get rid of every single police officer in the city of Minneapolis. We have seen, and I have talked to individuals who have talked about the fact that for years, they have never relied on the Minneapolis Police Department. A woman shared with me that she called the police after she was assaulted, only to have the police officers show up the next day. This is the type of information that we are learning through this Department of Justice investigation, and particularly the work that the community and many of these canvassers behind me have been doing across the city. It took community to bring forth the voices of the community to the federal investigation, because we do not want this investigation to be whitewashed. We do not want this investigation to be a checkbox. We want an exposure and accountability for a system that relied on clear failure of holding police officers accountable. This is a system that denies us justice. This is a system that relies on compounded cover-up from every level. The greatest example that many people may reflect on now is the fact that if Derek Chauvin was stopped, so many times he committed crimes against our community, if he was stopped after he put a young person in unconscious situation by kneeling on his neck for 40 minutes, how is it that incidents like that do not surface? How do officers like Derek Chauvin still serve on the force? How is it possible that while the entire world is rising for justice, in Minneapolis, police officers are hunting protesters and hunting individuals? We have a corrupt system that needs to be exposed, and we are demanding the Department of Justice to do its job fully, because the community is doing the best we can. We are dealing, as Jonathan mentioned, through harassment, intimidation from political candidates, from individuals serving the interest of the police department in an effort to mislead the public about this moment in time, a moment for reckoning, a moment for accountability, and a moment for the truth to come out. We want change and transformation in public safety, starting right here in Minneapolis and across this country. But it takes hard work. It takes individuals to be brave and courageous. We have for a long time ignored the cries of so many individuals who have been brutalized by our own tax dollars. And for the first time, 1,000 people are speaking out about clear injustice that took place in the actions of Minneapolis Police Department. My family has suffered from brutality. My own brother suffered from brutality by the Minneapolis Police Department. A man who is handicapped was thrown to the ground by the Minneapolis Police Department and physically injured. But he was afraid to share that story because he was afraid that there will never be accountability. And for many people across the city of Minneapolis, that is what they have felt for years. And for now, this Department of Justice investigation, we hope, can bring light to what has been happening in the city. So we ask for the Minneapolis Department, the Minneapolis leaders, elected leaders, to understand that there is an investigation going on, and they should do everything possible to make sure that the city is cooperating with the federal agents. We still believe that the greatest move forward is for the people of the city and the many citizens who have woken up after the killing of George Floyd to start to now listening to each other. We call on the residents of the city of Minneapolis and those who work here and interact with the Minneapolis Police Department to do their part. If you believe that the killing of George Floyd was unjust, then sit down and talk to a neighbor, a friend, a colleague, the bus driver, and ask them how their experience has been. And let's fully provide the full weight of understanding of how corrupt and how much change is needed for the Minneapolis Police Department. And that is why we need now, as we are heading to the election and beyond, this investigation is critical. It's critical because we have had never an opportunity to expose the corruption of this department. And in this situation, in this moment, we can. We have seen that the only time we hear of corruption, we hear of these major incidents, is when there's a legal action to actually get the data, to actually get the body camera, to actually get this information. But now the federal department is actually investigating all of these things. But what we need, and I'll end with this, is the community's role. We have canvassers going out, but we need community canvassers. We need individuals, teachers, educators, professionals, interfaith, faith leaders. Everyone in the city of Minneapolis should know there is a Department of Justice investigation, and you have a role to reach out to the traumatized, impacted communities of color who have suffered from the oppression and violence committed against them by the tax-paid police department in Minneapolis. And be aware that those conversations are heavy. Those conversations are painful for those who will relive it once again. But in this moment, they may not fall on deaf ears. They may fall on the ears of the federal government and on the ears of community members who will stand with them and support them.
Thank you. We will now hear from Tashira Garraway, who is with Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence. I do want to reiterate a point that Jaylani said. People in the community can still get those their experiences to us. We have a form on our website. We have additional community forums that are going to be done virtually because now the weather's getting, unpredictable and such. So we're going to bring all of it inside, but we'll be having virtual events. We're also going to be continuing to collect people's experiences, and they can go to our website, www.cuapb.org, and there's a link right on the front page of that website where they can actually share their experiences with us, and that's yet another way for people to get in touch with us. They can also get in touch directly with the Department of Justice, and we'll share that. We have that information shared on our website as well. Thank you. So Tashira.
Again, my name is Tashira Garraway. I am the founder of Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence. But first and foremost, and most of all, I am the fiance and the mother of Justin Tigan's now 14-year-old son. Justin Tigan was brutally beat to death by the St. Paul police here in the state of Minnesota and thrown inside of a trash dumpster August 19, 2009. I have been a part of helping to organize with this investigation of the Minneapolis police. And what our families and our community is hoping for is that the investigation spreads beyond the Minneapolis police, because we do understand that there has been almost 500 bodies that have been stolen here in the state of Minnesota at the hands of law enforcement. And we know that all of these murders did not happen at the hands of Minneapolis police alone, but we know that the investigation had to start somewhere. So we are very grateful that the DOJ is here to investigate the Minneapolis police, but what we are asking for as families, as victims, is that they spread this investigation past the Minneapolis police. There has been a great deal of brutalization that has been done in this state. It has been allowed. George Floyd is the face of hundreds of murders here in the state of Minnesota, and Derek Chauvin is the face of hundreds of cops that are still out there, that are still walking free, that are still on the forces, that have retired, that are at home with their families while we live without ours. So enough is enough. I completely support this investigation. It is needed, it is necessary. And I encourage the rest of the community that is afraid, that is scared to come forward and tell your story. Say what happened to you. We have people that are living in the community that is afraid, that is scared, that don't know where to turn and don't know what to do at the hands of people that took an oath to protect and serve. This is ridiculous that we have people that are sitting in the political seats that are not standing up and being a human being and understanding that we need this investigation to go on. Why are the canvassers, why are these people being harassed for doing the right thing? They're doing what human beings need. They're coming to help the community that is hurting, that have been brutalized. If the police, the Minneapolis police, have done everything right, they haven't done anything wrong, and George Floyd is the only one, then there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to worry about. Let the investigation go on and let justice and truth prevail in this situation. Again, we ask the DOJ to further the investigation. The BCA has been a part of the cover-ups. They need an investigation as well.
Yes, they do.
And the other cities, within Minnesota also need an investigation as well. So that is what we are asking for, pleading for, is that the DOJ further this investigation, and starting with the BCA first, then on to the St. Paul and other entities around Minnesota. But we have a real problem here in the state of Minnesota. The biggest profile cases that we have ever seen in history have came from the state of Minnesota. Dante Wright, George Floyd, Jamar Clark, Fernando Castillo have all came from the state of Minnesota. And for every high profile case that you hear of, there's 100 names behind that big name that they were able to sweep under the rug and try to keep quiet. These families deserve the same amount of justice that George Floyd received. And he didn't even receive the justice that he deserved. But the rest of these families at least deserve their day in court and deserve to get their stories heard. An investigation done for their families. My family deserves it, and so does the rest of these families in the hurting community. Thank you.
Next up, we're going to hear from Berhan Muhammad, and Berhan is the supervisor of our Somali team, and he has some interesting information to share with you about what's been going on within the Somali community as they have tried to gather these experiences. And Berhan?
Good afternoon. My name is Berhan Muhammad, as B-U-R-H-A-N, last name M-O-H-U-M-E-D. And as Michelle said, I'm one of the lead canvassers here on the South Side, specifically on the West Bank. I work with two other young men. We've been working for about a little over a month, I believe. And, you know, having to go out there and, you know, door knock and engage some of the community members, we've come across some reluctance. People being, you know, obviously being hesitant in you know, sharing their stories, but we also met with some real, what we believe to be some sort of campaign to mislead and misinform the community members that we're trying to, you know, actively engage. And that's where, you know, where we see a lot of our signs disappear, and we're having to literally, you know, do roundabouts, you know, checking to see if they're gone or not. And we've seen just within the day, you know, having them being removed. And some of it is direct, and some of it is really discreet. And we believe that some of that effort is coming from powerful people with a lot of resources. Let's just say that, and it's obvious, you know, because with some of the experience that we've had, you know, it's one thing for people to, especially in these vulnerable communities, to, you know, sort of keep a tight, you know, lip on, you know, their contact with police, because obviously a lot of us are afraid of being harassed, and you know, and that sort of harassment being persistent, and it has happened for a lot of us who grew up on the north side or on the south side, where, you know, it's literally an open target. You know, we're open targets, as some people say. And so, and some of that campaign, that deliberate campaign to misinform and sort of, you know, and spread some of that propaganda about, you know, that we're trying to get rid of the police and you know, and remove all of the police officers, which is obviously ridiculous. But literally, when we engage some of these folks in the community, that's the type of response we're getting. I mean, and we're telling them, hey, look, you know, for example, if Officer John harassed you, assaulted you, you know, you can, you know, talk about that. We're not talking about, you know, this obviously very overwhelming system of policing that has, you know, that has its own separate discussion that needs to be had. But we're talking about specific cases, personal experiences, and that has become, you know, like pulling teeth. And again, like I said, a lot of it is people being reluctant and fearful, because, you know, we're dealing with a very powerful entity, you know, in the police. They have a lot of reach. They have a lot of people that are working with them within our communities, that are mouthpieces for them, and that can get a lot of people in trouble. And so, and that's not a conspiracy. That's not, you know, stretching the truth. There are people who are being paid within our communities, you know, who are involved, especially when you're talking about this being election season. I mean, you can imagine the type of resources and money that goes into establishing this fearful, you know, this fear mongering of believing that, that the police literally stand in the way of you being safe, which is, for a lot of us who grew up in these poor environments, in these poor conditions, that's not the truth. And anyone who knows about these situations will tell you that. They come after the scene. And despite people telling us that, hey, look, they come 20, 30 minutes later, those same people will tell you, you're trying to get rid of the police. And it's like, which is which? And so obviously there is some deliberate campaign, we believe, that's led by people within our communities, such as organizations and institutions within our communities, such as mosques or churches, or any other organization within our communities that have the pull and the power to influence people. And that's what we're really going up against, honestly. And like I said, our job as canvassers is really to get these personal experiences. We're not trying to get into the broad politics of what you think about the police or what you feel about the police, but it's us asking you, what experiences do you have? If you don't have any experiences where you were fortunate enough to never meet the brute force of these people, then that's good and well, and hopefully it continues to be that way. But there are people who need to share these stories, and that's the people that we're hopefully creating some sort of opportunity for them to come talk to us. And so and like I said, on the south side, especially on the West Bank, we're literally just putting up as many yard signs, giving out as much literature as we can to make people feel comfortable and engaging them in conversations that at least has them thinking about this. Because especially within our community, the Somali community, it being black and immigrant and Muslim, we don't have any of these sort of resources to let people know that there is an opportunity, in you being able to speak out if you've been violated by the police. Because again, we can only imagine, the type of horrific stories that people have been able to share with us, and the type of courage it takes, and other people who decide to go to the grave with it. And some people do that, honestly. Anybody can tell you, having lived in the city for that long. And so again, we're asking people to come out and be able to share their truth. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear from Evan Pugh, who is one of the other canvasser supervisors. He's going to talk a little bit about the harassments that our canvassers have experienced over time. Evan?
Oh, sure. My name is Evan Pugh, E-V-A-N-P-U-G-H. So I've been one of the supervisors in the other semi-autonomous canvassing group. We are a little more mobile, so it feels like maybe we've experienced less consistent, intense harassment. But if you look at the final page that you were given upon entry, you can see kind of a rough timeline. It is incomplete. There are more experiences, but just kind of walking through this, we were canvassing for about a month, maybe a month and a half at most, without really any incident from police. And it feels like there was a moment, and this is based on my recollection, where that changed, where we maybe made enough of a stink that we were suddenly an item of interest in the 5th precinct and then across all precincts in the city. So that was roughly the end of August. And since then, there has been an increasing number of interactions with the police that are at minimum questionable, at most overtly antagonistic, and admittedly it can be hard to tell when we're working because we work in places that have a lot of police patrolling, and it's not always clear whether that surveillance is directed at us or the people we are trying to talk to, just as a baseline of that neighborhood. So that said, it was me personally on, Monday, so 2 days ago, when I was talking with somebody and a squad car, it was dark so I didn't get their number unfortunately. This is the second to the last entry here. Rolled up behind me, startled me because they took a turn really loud and then turned on their lights and immediately turned them off after going down 2 blocks. For no purpose whatsoever that I can see because there wasn't traffic, aside from making me jump. So that's some of the stuff we interact with. On another note, this has been really an eye-opening job for me, and it's been one that I really find important because there are, as Tashira mentioned, so many families, so many individuals who have stories of quite horrific trauma at the hands of law enforcement or the prison system or the jail system in Hennepin County that really do deserve to have their stories shared, but have felt very alone and haven't known where to look for support. So it feels really important to me to be able to be a resource to connect those people to support networks. And that's all. Thank you.
I want to emphasize again that we are continuing our work on this investigation and that people can access information on how to contribute their own experiences through our website at www.cuapb.org for Communities United Against Police Brutality, and that they can also find information on how to report directly to the DOJ if they'd like to do that as well. And so, we want people to continue to be engaged in this process. It's exceedingly important that people keep talking about what it is that we want out of our police, because we cannot get what we want unless we ask for it. And the Department of Justice, if things go the way that we expect they will, there will be a consent decree, which is essentially an agreement between the city and the Department of Justice to go forward with a list of changes, and then that agreement goes to the courts and becomes a court order. And so at that point, it's no longer optional. The DOJ has been in this community 4 or 5 times before, but these were never consent decrees. These were always some kinds of reports and recommendations and things like that that have consistently never been followed. This is a different ballgame, and it's different because if things go the way we expect they will, the city will have a mandate. They will not be able to not make these changes. They will have to make these changes. And so what's important to us is that the city be the group of people, the community, rather, I should say, the residents of the city, be the people who decide what those changes look like. That's the most important thing, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. And so I want to thank you all for being here. I want to invite any other canvassers who'd like to speak. Is there anybody else that'd like to say anything? Like I said, we're going to continue this work. We have much more work to do. 1,000 stories is fantastic, and actually it's almost 1,100 now, is fantastic, but that's only a small sampling of the experiences people have had with the Minneapolis police. So we want more people to step forward and talk about what they have gone through and inform the investigation in that way. And as I said before, we're going to also be working with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights in their investigation and using a lot of the same material to inform that investigation as well. And so with that, if you have any questions.
Yeah, Michelle, you said you talked to folks in other cities, your counterparts in other places that have gone through this process with DOJ and consent decrees.
Correct.
What makes the difference between a successful outcome and one that is not as successful in these instances?
That's a great question, thank you. Our experience talking to several other people in other cities, activists who have worked on these DOJ investigations and the consent decrees that came out of them, is that the community has to be at the table. And every step of the way, informing the investigation, but also inserting our desires into the consent decree, and then even afterwards, making sure that the monitoring of that consent decree is done properly so that, the community actually gets what it wants and the monitors are not letting the cities just slide around. I'm from New Orleans, and I know the people that are monitoring that consent decree down there. I talk to them frequently. I'm very aware of that particular agreement, and there's pluses and minuses for all these agreements, and we're trying to avoid the downfalls and make sure that we have an excellent agreement. We did, as part of our investigation into this process, we did bring into town a woman named Iris Raleigh with the Cincinnati Black United Front, and also their attorney, Al Gerhardstein, and they came and talked to us about their process with the DOJ, which is considered to be the most successful consent decree in the country. And so we want to model our work after the most successful consent decree in the country. So we brought them in and had some events with them where we did a lot of learning about how to make sure that what we're doing is successful. I've been doing this work a long time. I've wanted the DOJ to come here for over 20 years. And it's important to me that we get this right now that they're here. And so we're going to make sure the community is front and center in this process.
Did they give you a timeline about how long the investigation would take and before
Yes.
anything happened?
Their initial timeline was 9 to 12 months. I expect, and we stay in regular touch with them. In fact, we just had a meeting with them again last week. And I expect that timeline is going to go out more like the 12-month or even beyond.
And when did it start?
It started in April.
April.
Very, very end of April. You could really say May.
That's right.
Yeah.
Will there be public hearings where people can come and testify before the administrators of the DOJ?
Yes, there are. Yes, there are going to be those opportunities. They have had one already. That was a virtual event. And, there's a lot of, they're under a lot of lockdown with the federal government about COVID, obviously. And so they've had to do everything virtually. And when they come into town, even though they're in town, we cannot meet with them in person right now. We have to do everything with, Zoom type things. But they have had a couple of events. They're going to have more at our encouragement. But they are extremely grateful to us. Like I said, we met with them just last week again. And they are extremely impressed with the number of experiences we've gotten and extremely grateful for the work we've done to make sure that their investigation is fully informed.
Just finally, have you brought to their attention, these folks you're dealing with from DOJ, about these harassment or intimidation issues, and have they given you any feedback on either they'll look into or?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Yes, when we met with the DOJ last week, we outlined a number of these incidents that have occurred, as well as what's happening on the West Bank with the misinformation campaign that's going on. And they were quite concerned about that. And in fact, they are going to be meeting with and talking with some of our canvassers who have gone through those experiences.
And do you know, I don't know if the DOJ addressed this with you at all, or if it even matters, but if Amendment 2 passes and what is now the MPD becomes part of a broader Department of Public Safety, will that affect this process in any way?
We've discussed it a little bit with them, and I don't believe it will affect this process whatsoever. The bottom line is that police have to operate under policies and practices, and they have a set of bad policies and practices that they're operating under now, and that isn't going to likely change, after November 2nd, at least not anytime soon. And so their investigation into the ongoing patterns and practices of the police has absolute relevance and will continue to have relevance. And I want you to think about this. After George Floyd was killed, did the police really change? And we would say that they got worse, not better. Yeah. So I think that a lot of people recognize that all of these, this investigation and the work that we're doing to inform the investigation are going to remain very relevant no matter what happens on November 2nd. Other questions? Does anybody else have anything you want to add?
Could I get the spelling? I think it was Tashira and Jonathan. Mm-hmm. Could you guys spell your name? Just quickly, just walk up to the mic, testify.
Yes, my name is Tashira Garraway, T as in Tom, O-S-H-I-R-A, last name G as in George, A-R-R-A-W-A-Y.
Jonathan, M-C-C-L-E-L-L-A-N.
Spell Jonathan for that.
Jonathan, J-O-H-N-A-T-H-O-N. Thank you
both.
Thank you all. And again, thank you for being here. We appreciate you covering this matter. It's important to the community. This is a pretty big deal. So thank you for being here.
And you have a second?
I do.